4.5 years to spend it in especially a GA kind of company, it's a fair chunk of your life, and I'm coming up nearly 7 years now at Paspaley, and there's certainly no end in sight. I couldn't think of any other job that I want to do that outdoes this job.
Welcome aboard the HiflyMedia podcast, dedicated to sharing the stories and experiences of the amazing people who make aviation happen. From pilots like me to engineers, air traffic controllers and others, I'll explore their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced and the triumphs they've achieved. My name is Damien and I'll be your host. Whether you're a seasoned aviation enthusiast or new to the field, I invite you to join me as we take off on this journey of discovery. Today, you join us on an incredible journey with a pilot whose story unfolds like a tapestry across the varied landscapes he's navigated. From the captivating south coast of Victoria to the enchanting Ha Long Bay in Vietnam, our guest has etched his legacy on the canvas of Australian aviation. Not only is he the skybound storyteller and host of the renowned aviation podcast On the Step, but he's also an accomplished pilot with thousands of hours logged at the controls of various aircraft, including the Cessna 206, the mighty Caravan, the iconic de Havilland Beaver, and from my understanding, some of the rarest birds being commercially operated, the majestic Grumman Mallard. So without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to that Mallard guy, the extraordinary Dan Bolton. Welcome, Dan.
G'day, Damien. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very good, thank you. I'm very grateful that you were willing to come on the podcast. I've been following you for some time on the socials and didn't know what a mallard was until I came across your podcast On the Step via another podcast. And then, once I saw the Mallard and saw that it had been converted to PT6s and the beautiful places you're flying into, I was pretty hooked and have been watching very keenly with what you've been putting out there on the social media. So really excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks very much, mate. Yeah, it's I think anyone who has followed my journey and followed the podcast especially will probably be a little bit disappointed that I'm not sitting at my desk tonight interviewing someone else for my own podcast. But it's good to be back behind the mic, mate, and share my story with all of your listeners.
And you know what? In talking about your story, I went and had a listen to episode 28 after you prompted me to go and do so, which for the listeners, if you don't know who Dan is or who that Mallard guy is and know his story, then you can certainly go and listen to a very comprehensive background on Dan and what he's flown. And the cool thing was Dan was being interviewed by one of his mates, and it was just a very entertaining podcast. So I would recommend, and in fact, I was talking to my wife after I'd reached out to you and you agreed to come on and you'd suggested to go and listen to the podcast. And I was listening to it and my wife came in and said, "How's it all going?" And I said, "Oh, good." I said, "It's a fascinating, just mind-blowing story." A bit like I was pretty mind-blown when I sat and chatted with Alex Penrose from the last, the corporate pilot from the last podcast.
Yep.
And listening to your story was the same. It was this whole aspect that I hadn't really given all that much grey matter to in the past, but I found so fascinating to listen to. And she said, "Oh, well, if he's done such an in-depth podcast, are you going to drag him through it again?" And I said, "Well, no." I said, "I don't think I need to." I said, "What my listeners need to do is go and listen to episode 28. Now, obviously, we'll cover some of that material tonight. And obviously, I'll go as deep as you want to into your history. But to be honest, I don't think I'm going to do your interviewer justice by trying to do that again because he did such a good job, and I apologise, I don't recall his name.
Good old Shane-O.
Shane, there you go. A very awkward name there, Shane-O. But I think he was a Kiwi, isn't he?
He was. He still is.
Still is a Kiwi. Hasn't given that up.
No, he hasn't given that up yet. As much as he wants to. He's currently flying in Bahrain, Shane, actually, on the 737 freighter. But he's the kind of guy. He was on my podcast as well early on. I think maybe around the 15 mark or something. And, he gave up flying. He hasn't given up. He's put on hold his airline career to go and chase the seaplane dream.
Yeah.
And, he's got an incredible story. And I just love his passion for, he grew up with planes in the family and, did a lot of bush flying in New Zealand, and just his passion for bush flying and, off the grid flying is really evident that he's actually, gone, I'm putting the airline life on hold and I'm going to go chase flying floats all around the world. He's done Maldives, Canada, could potentially do Australia next year as well.
Right.
So yeah, incredible story, and yeah, I just love hearing those ones where that people go out there and chase their dream.
Yeah, 100%. And that was evident with Alex, and I believe you know Alex Penrose.
Yeah, we flew together in the Whitsundays. He was already there when I moved to the Whitsundays back in 2011. I think that was now, and
right.
Yeah, so he was with the opposition, as I'm sure he probably mentioned.
Well, he mentioned, he was with Hamilton. He did mention
Whitsunday. Yeah,
Whitsunday.
Yep. So they were the kind of island operator, seaplanes, and we were the mainland operator. And it was certainly not. There was no real competition as such, because anyone who went to Hamilton Island was they would kind of go on that. If they wanted a seaplane, they'd go with Hamilton Island Air, and if you're on the mainland, you'd go with us. So, and it was always cool catching up at the beach. You'd land there at the beach and see another seaplane and drop in and say hello and catch up with Alex and whatnot. But he actually, I think he might have left only a year or two after I started, so I didn't really get to spend a lot of time on the water or at the beach with Alex. But fond memories for sure.
That's cool. Now, you mentioned that Shane has a fair bit of aviation heritage. You also have aviation heritage, correct?
Yeah, I do, mate. Yeah, so as some people may know, my dad was a seaplane pilot as well. In fact, he was a commercial pilot from quite young, I believe probably early 20s, and but then never really did it as a career as such. He went into the police force, did a bit of police air wing stuff, but then later on in his life, he kind of wanted to do his passion, which was flying. And it must have been about when I was in year 8 or something like that. He had bought a 206 and put it on floats and started a seaplane operation in Geelong. There was previously a seaplane operation there back in the day, probably 10 years before he started his, I think. And but he started up again and created this business called Bay City Seaplanes. And yeah, whilst I wasn't living with Dad at the time. My parents were separated when I grew up, so I'd only see Dad occasionally. But once I finished year 12 and stuff, I was kind of like, what am I going to do with my career, or what am I going to do after school and stuff? And the flying side of it kind of came to mind a little bit. There was never any, go get your license and you've got a job type thing.
Right.
But I kind of got introduced to aviation, I guess, down with his interests, and decided to follow that path, and got a loan out for my license, and did my license part-time whilst working. And when it came to trying to look for a job, this was only post GFC, so there wasn't many jobs going like there is today, for example. Yeah. And so I tried for 6 months or so, and Dad came out of the summer, and Dad said, look, why don't you go and get your float plane endorsement and help me out over the summer. It'd be good to have an extra set of hands over the summer. So I was lucky enough to start my career out like that.
Nice.
So yeah, it was definitely lucky, but was never intended to be that way. And ever since then, once I got into the role, Dad certainly pushed me along a fair bit. And unlike most operators these days, where you ride the desk for a while and then you're put through a huge amount of ICAS, I think Dad basically just said, "There's the keys," and we smashed out a fair few. A few little quick ICAS flights, and as soon as he could get out of that right seat, he was.
Yeah, right.
He was a pretty good salesman, Dad, so he was probably better off on the ground anyway, and trying to get the next bums on the seat. So, kind of got thrown in the deep end, but it was really good fun, actually. So that's one part of it. But my uncle is, he's retired now, but he was at Qantas for over 40 years.
Oh, wow.
He was on one of the first... cadet, or was it cadet, or the cadet programs that they ran way back in, I think it was the 70s or something. Mm-hmm. The initial Qantas cadetships, I think they were. Cadet's probably the wrong word. There's probably a better word for it. But anyway, so he was at Qantas for over 40 years and ended up, in command of the 747s and all that kind of stuff. Not that I really knew him that well anyway, so there wasn't much aviation influence coming down there. And then both of those, my dad and my uncle, followed, I guess, in the footsteps of their dad. My grandfather, he was in World War II as a Spitfire pilot in New Guinea, and also tiger moth instructor in just outside of Melbourne. So
Is that like
definitely
Point
aviation.
Cook or something?
Yeah,
or?
Point Cook area. Yeah,
nice.
So definitely aviation in the family. That's for sure.
That's just mind blowing that your grandfather was a Spitfire pilot. That's so amazing.
Yeah, it's something I haven't had the chance to kind of sit down with Dad or my uncle yet and really, speak about or kind of hear the stories. That's something that needs to happen soon, I think. And well, maybe that could be the next episode, mate.
I was going to say, have you had your dad or your uncle on the podcast?
No, I haven't. No, well, look, my uncle, he, my podcast is obviously very seaplane orientated, so he doesn't make the cut, unfortunately, only. But Dad certainly would. I think his business, unfortunately, ended with a gear down water landing. Which was another pilot had been put on for the summer, and Dad had actually I flew it with straight floats at the time when I flew it, but he'd upgraded them to amphibs, and unfortunately the pilot landed gear down in front of him actually in the water. Luckily everyone walked away okay, but that was the end of the business from then on. And I think he's just had a few things that have kind of tainted him at the end of his career. He's now retired, but we'll get him on the podcast one day, I'm sure, because he did help with my first ever kids book as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on.
100%.
He was the illustrator actually as well.
Okay.
That's a good segue to get him on the podcast, isn't it? Surely.
100%. That'd be great. Definitely. So you mentioned you finished grade 12, got into flight training. Where did you do your flight training?
It was all down at the old Geelong Aviation flight training school there at Grovedale Airport or Geelong Airport, which was really convenient. Now these days, if you were to attempt to land there, you'd land in someone's backyard because it's been filled in with housing estate. So don't direct to and onto the GPS with that one if it still exists. But it was perfect for me actually. The airport I got so lucky because the airport was literally about 2 turns out of my street that I grew up in.
Wow.
So, it was not that hard. It was about a 5-minute drive, and if that didn't exist, most likely would have had to have meant I would have had to commute or go and move to Melbourne or something like that and go to one of the bigger schools and do it full time, which I probably couldn't have afforded to do. So certainly the stars aligned with that one.
Yeah.
Learned to fly in Geelong there, did their commercial course, 150-hour course, and year and a half of part-time working at Coles, stacking shelves as a young 19-year-old and smash the hours out and
do you recall
the test on.
Do you recall what airframes you were flying?
Yeah, so obviously 152, 172 for the early lessons and whatnot. Then we moved up into the Arrow. For the commercial training, there was a Piper Arrow there. I was backseating a nav one day actually, and one of my best mates was the one doing his lesson. He was learning to fly as well at the same time as me, and him and the instructor looked down at the oil pressure and it was down in the yellow, and they decided that we should probably cancel this nav and head back to Geelong, and ended up finding metal in the engine, and it took that plane offline. But the owner, who was a Qantas pilot, owned a couple of light aircraft, and another one was a Cessna Cardinal 177 that was up in Bankstown, and so he said basically you can go and pick that one up if you want and bring it back down. It wasn't doing much in Bankstown, and finish your license in that. So we actually, funny story, we actually went down. We went up to Sydney. It was actually my first time on a commercial aircraft.
Right.
Flying up to Sydney as a 19-year-old. I think I videoed the whole flight. And we got to Sydney, picked up this machine, and it was just one of those typical private pilot flights when you're trying to go somewhere when you didn't, when you really don't need to. We picked up this machine and had all this black soot down the belly of it, and we're like, oh, what's all that about? And obviously don't clean their aircraft very much. And then we're going to kind of do the run-ups and go to take off. My mate was the one who was the pilot flying, the pilot in command of the whole aircraft. I just came along for the ride, really, and experience. and we went to lean it, and you almost had the mixture control in the back seat before it would actually start to lose, or the EGT would even register, or it would look like it was even going to cut off. It was that far out.
Yeah, right.
And just kind of confused about it, and didn't really think too much about it. We flew it down to Wagga Wagga for fuel, and it was just fouling up really bad. And so the engineers there decided they'd help us out, but it meant we had to stay in Wagga Wagga a night, and then all of a sudden the next day, we're getting down there. They still haven't fixed it. It's not until after lunch. The weather's not very good, and we kind of just were like, let's just keep flying, and we'll find somewhere else.
Sure.
If we don't get home, we'll just find somewhere else. So that was the kind of mentality that we had. And as we're coming further south, once the airplane was fixed, we're kind of flying further south there, and the cloud base is getting lower, and the terrain's getting higher, and we're starting to get kind of down pretty low, and scudding around all this cloud. These silly 60-hour pilots or whatever we were at the time, maybe near 100, and we were right near Cowra on the border of New South Wales and Victoria, and trying to use the GPS to get us to where the airport was, but we couldn't get through because of weather and all this kind of stuff. And we were pretty calm the whole time, but we kind of looked at each other and said, we need to get this thing down. And we looked down below us, and there was this perfect long paddock, and kind of did a run down it like you do in your private training, the old precautionary field approach, and looked awesome, looked super long, no trees, everything, and came down, landed this plane in this paddock, and it was just a random experience. I think once we kind of shut down, we kind of looked at each other and kind of started laughing, but it was obviously a lot more serious than we thought. And so just those funny little things you remember from your flight training will get yourself into as an inexperienced young pilot, I guess.
But that all adds to the experience in the long run.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I got fond memories of that day, and the best part was walking. Kind of got out of the plane in this paddock and walked across this little road, very much a country area, and there's just one house across the road, and it turned out to be a winery, and get across there and kind of knock on their door, and I kind of went down along the side of this what looked like a house, and this kind of lady standing there. She's like, "Excuse me." I'm like, "Yeah, hi. Just landed our plane in the paddock across the road there. Any chance you could borrow a phone? I think there's no reception or something, Yeah. And she's like, "Well, you need to go through the front office." I was like, "Oh, okay, sorry."
The whole we just landed really a plane in the paddock.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really care about how I enter your property. I just need a bit of help, Yeah. It was a fun time.
Far out.
I was kind of proud, I guess. Like I said before, I wasn't the pilot in command anyway, but we were kind of working as a team, I guess, in a way, helping each other out with the decision-making process. But I was pretty proud of the fact that we did keep pretty calm, and it's tough to make a decision like we're actually going to land this thing in a paddock.
Because who knows what's going to happen.
Well, exactly, yeah. And we got lucky again with the fact that it was a very good and simple choice.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we had to, dodge rocks or slopes or
culverts,
power lines. Exactly.
Yeah.
It could have been an airfield. You know what I mean? Like we got super lucky.
Yeah.
But still, you don't know that. You don't know what the texture really is until you get down, especially in kind of murky weather.
Yeah.
It's hard to see out. So
no,
it was an experience, and like you said, all adds to that experience bag that you try and fill as quickly as possible before you run out of the luck bag.
Oh, totally.
Which I used a bit that day.
What was it like to fly? Like, once again, I don't really want to dive deep into your aviation history because it's documented so well in episode 28. So for anyone that's listening, if you want to hear the history, go and listen to episode 28 of On the Step, and you will get the whole rundown. What I'm interested in finding out from Dan more so is experiences like that. So, in the intro, I read that obviously you'd flown in South Victoria out to the 12 Apostles and doing those tourist flights and the Whitsundays and in Vietnam and obviously now in the top end. So I'm really keen to hear from you about what it's like to fly in these places. You've flown in some of the most beautiful places that I can think of that I've been, although I haven't been to the top end yet, and nor have I been to Vietnam. But obviously I've seen pictures and videos of it. What's it like to fly in these places?
Yeah, well, I guess one thing that comes with the territory of flying, generally seaplanes, is the fact that, a lot of seaplane operators are tourist operators.
Yeah.
And you don't put a seaplane, as a tourist operation in an area that's not very interesting. So I guess a lot of these ocean-going spots that are good, they've got some tourist value. A seaplane option is a good one, and that means as a pilot, you end up having exposure to some beautiful locations, like you said. So, first one, as I mentioned, was Geelong. It probably wasn't high up on the list of those touristy spots. It was more of Dad used to say it was the cherry ripe at the counter at Coles. So, people would walk along down the waterfront on their weekend with their family or whatever, having a fun time out, and then all of a sudden there it was. There's a seaplane. Yeah. There's a 15-minute experience, about 8 minutes in the air, take off and land on the water. It was in a pretty good budget. And let's just grab that cherry ripe at the counter there.
Gotcha.
And have a bit of fun. Whereas, the Whitsundays was you go to the Whitsundays as a tourist destination, and you generally book all these things in advance. And what we offered there was a premium service to Whitehaven Beach and to the Great Barrier Reef. That was I still think that's one of the best jobs that you could do, really, flying seaplanes in the Whitsundays. There's a bit going on there at the moment with a couple of the operators, but if they were to get that back up and running to what it was and what it should be with what quality product there is out of Airlie Beach there, it's just one of the most awesome jobs. There was guys that I was working with there who'd been at companies for 8-9 years, even 10+ years, and if everything was good with the company, they'd probably never leave.
Right.
So, just departing out in aircraft like the Beaver, and, you had on one aspect, you got the radial engine, you slide your window down, you put your arm out and get the sun beaming down on your arm as you're listening to the radial purr away. And it didn't matter that you couldn't climb much higher than 1,500 feet because it was so hot, and they were terrible performing aircraft, really, in the Whitsundays. But, then you could fly the Caravan the next day and have the air-conditioned comfort and fly 9 other people, and the power of the PT6 and the performance of the PT6. You never got stuck on the water. It was a great combination of aircraft, and then to go to Whitehaven Beach, regularly voted one of Australia's best beaches, and pour champagne and have your lunch sitting on the float in the sun, watching the fish swim around your feet, mate, and then take them out to the reef and run a snorkel tour off your private vessel that's just parked out at the reef permanently. It was just, mind-blowing.
It sounds very dreamy.
Yeah, it's totally dreamy. One thing that did frustrate me, though, was when you got applications from airline pilots who are in their 50s and 60s saying this would be a great retirement gig, because it really wasn't. It was a lot of hard work. And, at the end of the day, you didn't just park the plane and walk away with your guests and go drinking with them in town. You stayed back and you pumped the floats and you washed down, and then you waited for the next one to come in, and then you helped them wash down. And, when it was blowing 20 knots at Whitehaven and windy, it was not easy. You still try to get the job done, and you're fighting your anchor and, outgoing tides and stopping the plane, getting beaching. And it wasn't always nice jumping in the water at Whitehaven. When in the middle of winter, it was still pretty chilly there,
Yeah.
You still got to jump into waist deep sometimes, and get the guests off and try and keep them happy and everything. And if it's 20 knots out at the reef as well, it's pretty hard keeping the punters from brushing the coral, and so it was a lot of work as well, but it was very rewarding and an amazing experience, that's for sure.
And so from Whitehaven to Vietnam.
Yeah, sorry, I guess, so I forgot about the next spot, which was Vietnam and the experiences there. But that's once again, that was an interesting one, actually, because Halong Bay is definitely a tourist destination, and but and a beautiful area. But these seaplanes were one of the first really GA aircraft to be in Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam doesn't have a GA industry at all. It's only airlines and military. And it was set up, that business, by City Seaplanes, experienced people, Aaron Shaw and Adam Holt, set that business up over there. And got a chance to do nearly a year there in Vietnam. And a lot of that was actually really just ferrying people from Hanoi to Halong Bay to catch their junk boat rides. But when the skies were blue over there, it was beautiful. And we did do some scenic flying from the islands, like 15-minute scenic flights out to the islands. But we always, when we departed either back to Hanoi or back into Halong Bay, we'd always do a little scenic flight around the islands, which was some incredible scenery. Once again, it's just prehistoric in that area there. So that goes once again with the seaplane territory.
And then the elephant in the room is the mallard. So can you unpack for the listeners what Paspaley is and why they have these iconic, rare seaplanes, flying boats, and how you got involved in that? What's that story look like?
Well, to answer the first question, so Paspaley is a business by a family named Paspaley. So they're a Greek family who came to Australia back in the early 1900s and started a pearling operation. Nick Paspaley Senior was that who started that, and back in the day, the pearl shell itself, Pinctata maximus is the shell name. That's the one that we have up in the top end here that we produce these beautiful pearls from.
Right.
They were used. The shell is called mother of pearl, and they were used more for as buttons and other items for nice clothing and whatnot. But so it was actually the shell that was actually more used back in the day. Wow. And but then the plastic scene came on, and buttons were kind of being made by plastic.
Right.
But there was this pearls that were coming out of them. They were quite valuable and beautiful big pearls. And so the company went down the pearling line, and we now have it goes through many stages. We open and close farms here and there throughout the top end, but we now have 4 main farms at the moment. One is to the northeast of Darwin, up in Port Bremer, which is in the Coburg Peninsula, about a 40-minute flight in the Mallard. Mm-hmm. And then the other 3 are in Western Australia, in the Osborne Islands and the Kimberley, Kiri Bay and the Kimberley, and then a big farm in the Broome area.
Right.
The main production these days is for pearls, but nothing really goes to waste. There's pearl meat, and they still do use the shell as well for watch faces and whatnot. So as most businesses do, they kind of try and use as much of any product they make to get it out there. So that is the Paspaley family, I guess, and the bit of a story about the pearling, I guess. Mm-hmm. So obviously, as I said there, we have 4 pearl farms that are spread out from Darwin to Broome, basically. So and these pearl farms are located in one of the most isolated spots on the planet, really, which is the Kimberley. So the mission, I guess, is that we need to fly in and fly out workers to these pearl farms. Most of them are vessel based, so a vessel sitting in the water there, a crew that live on board that vessel, and they go out and they clean the shell majority of the year round. They just make sure that the shell are nice and clean, don't have any growth on them, so they can actually filter the water through and feed well, basically. So that's their main primary job, and doing other odd jobs on the farm and whatnot. But so our mission in the Mallard there is to fly in and out these workers. Now, so that mission requires generally pretty big payloads, anywhere up to 12 people sometimes, and any freight that needs to go out there to there might be some urgent freight, something's broken down, it might require things to be flown out in an instant or the next flight, and So payload is a big one, and we need to, as I mentioned, we need to carry a big distance, and then on top of that, we need to land on the water. So what is available out there today, aircraft-wise, does not outdo what the Mallard still can do today, especially with the turboprop upgrade. So we TAS at 180 knots up to. Well, since the rules have changed for Part 91, we can go to 12,000 without oxygen. So 180 knots TAS, we can take 1.2 tons of payload, and when we're fully loaded, we can still fly for 3.1 hours, and that generally gets us to that Osborne Island farm.
Right.
And it gets us back to Truscott Air Base in the Kimberley there to refuel. So,
right.
Yeah, and we get to land on the water. It handles good rough water conditions. Obviously, we are quite open, exposed areas that can get quite rough, and the flying boat handles rough water better than a float plane does. So so that's the reason why we're here today, I guess, with the aircraft. As you mentioned, the aircraft is quite rare. It was actually 1947 they were built, so nearly 77 years ago, and only 59 were ever built, which is that's mind-boggling.
That is mind-blowing.
Because you think about those aircraft. they were war aircraft, but Spitfires and Mustangs and all that kind of stuff, they were built in the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Like I said, they weren't a war aircraft, but just post-war, but I think only 59 were ever built, and we still operate 3 of them in commercial operations is pretty nuts. So obviously, being so old, they require a lot of upgrades in avionics, engines. We've actually got a lot of, we have some wing spar strengthening straps, a lot of work on corrosion and just system stuff. The fuel's a little bit different with the way our tanks are set up. And but all in all, it still is the hull that was built 77 years ago, which is very amazing. How did I get to being where I am today? Well, it has a lot to do with coming with seaplane experience, and probably ended up being the fact that I flew with Air Whitsunday, because majority, and in fact, I think all 6 of our pilots at the moment have actually flown through Air Whitsunday.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of, there's a bit of a joke that it is actually a bit of a stepping stone up into the Mallard.
Right.
When I was actually in Vietnam, and I heard from a friend, Drew, actually, who said that someone had just put their resignation in, and a spot has become available, or will become available in the future. If kind of said, if you're interested, this is probably a good time to get on board, because these spots don't open up regularly.
Yeah. And
put my resume in and did all the stuff, and was lucky enough to be accepted as a first officer at the time. And it's been an incredible journey so far. I can't believe, I used to look back at my time at Air Whitsunday and think, I was there for 4.5 years, and as a 25-year-old, I think I was when I left, I was like, that's a long time, 4.5 years to spend it in especially a GA kind of company. It's a fair chunk of your life, and I'm coming up nearly 7 years now at Paspaley, and there's certainly no end in sight. I couldn't think of any other job that I want to do that outdoes this job. For lifestyle and the incredible flying that we get to do. So, and
it'd have to be challenging. Like, no 2 days, maybe in winter there might be some days that are fairly similar, but you tell me.
Well, we don't have winter and summer up here. We have wet season and dry season.
True.
So that's so our winter, or your winter, I should say, is our dry season. And that look, it's funny, they're two completely different seasons, but they bring 2 different challenges. The dry season, generally clear blue skies all the time. So from an IFR perspective, we do operate these aircraft IFR all the time, pretty much, other than a few random exceptions. But from an IFR perspective, the dry season brings blue skies and not really a challenge in that aspect. But then we generally get a lot stronger easterly winds, the trade winds. So from a water perspective, they're a lot more challenging, finding smoother areas to land in, handling, bigger, rougher swells, so that can be a challenge. And then the wet season, it's kind of reverse. The IFR weather aspect is a lot more demanding, or it can be, and the water aspect can be a lot more flatter and calmer. So it does bring those two different challenges, I guess. But you're right. We do go to the same spots quite regularly, which is you think about aviation, what you want to do is the mission all the time, and going to the same spot over and over again might bore people, but that's where the seaplane aspect makes it more interesting, because you might be going to Osborne Islands again, but you're landing in a completely different area that's only a mile away from where you did last time, but that brings different challenges on the water. Might be the terrain that you've got to think about this time. It might be the wind direction on the water creates different risks or different things to consider as well. So that's overall, I just think there's just no better job, I think, than what we do here, and it's super rewarding and super challenging. But love it.
I think it's incredibly fascinating. Just contemplating all that, and what just ran through my mind is, you mentioned that you fly IFR, like pretty much every flight's IFR, and for the non-aviation geeks out there, that means flying under instrument flight rules. So imagine there's two different flight rules that we have in the piloting world, in the aviation world. One is visual, where you have to be clear of cloud and inside of ground. And so you can't fly through cloud. It's fair weather flying. And the other is, if you jump on an airline to fly from city A to city B, that airline takes off and the weather can be poor and you fly up through the cloud, well, that's an instrument rated flight, or it's a flight in instrument meteorological conditions. What ran through my head, so that's just to paint that picture for the non-av geeks out there. What ran through my head, having done an instrument rating, is when you're coming into an airport, you'll have an instrument approach, and it's a set of rules, let's call it, a path, a vertical path as well as a lateral path that you need to follow in order to get down, potentially through that cloud, down to a minimum safe altitude where you need to be able to visually see the airport, the runway that you're going to land at. Dan, you've talked about you're not flying to airports, you're flying to ocean. Is there instrument approaches, or is it a case of air traffic taking you down to what's it called?
LSAL.
Lower safe altitude. Is that what it is? What does it look like? Paint the picture.
Yeah, look, it's a common question that I get from people when I say that we fly IFR but we land on the water. They're like, how does that work? And it comes down to a simple thing, and don't forget that there are airports out there that don't have instrument approaches. Mm-hmm. And pilots can still fly IFR into these airports. Mm-hmm. And you don't need an instrument approach at an airport to fly IFR. So what you then have to, if it can't get you down below the lowest safe without an instrument approach, then you just have to do a visual approach to get below the lowest safe. So basically all we do is we hit our top of descent, and if we're in IMC, then we fly all the way down to our lower safe altitude, which is generally a route calculated lower safe, mm-hmm. rather than a grid. It gets you down a lot lower.
Yep.
We level off at that altitude if we're in IMC still, and if we're visual, we call from 30 miles that we're going to do a visual approach, which is part of the visual approach requirements. Mm-hmm. And we then reset our AMS, our altitude management system, down to our circuit height, basically, and we continue down, then committing to be visual. So
gotcha.
So for those guests or those listeners who don't understand that, so we cannot go in cloud. We shouldn't go in cloud. We obviously can if we're silly, but we shouldn't be going through cloud anywhere below that lower safe altitude, and that's what happens. But the other thing as well is that you got to think about the different types of weather we encounter up here in the top end versus, like the Melbournes or the Sydneys.
Right.
Like I said, 6-8 months of the year we're dry season conditions and it's blue skies. So, it's quite easy just to get visual. And then when it comes to the wet season, unless really there's a monsoonal trough, the weather we're expecting is probably big cumulus buildups rather than a blanket, levels of cloud.
Yeah.
A lot of the cloud we get up here is generally that kind of real fluffy,
towering kind
build up, towering, kind of cumulus, which you don't want to go in anyway. So you kind of fly around that and stay visual most of the time. It's funny. We don't do a lot of actual IMC flying, but we're in IFR flight rules,
that makes
all
sense.
the time. So 6 months a year we don't fly in cloud because there's no cloud, and then the other 6 months of the year we try and avoid the cloud that there is there because it'll probably try and kill us, which is makes it a bit interesting. But there's been certainly times that I've had where the monsoon trough comes down and it is a bit more of a really blankety drizzle / heavy rain patches everywhere. And I have flown 2 hours from Darwin in IMC the whole time with the weather radar just panning to look at what we don't want to go through and getting bumped around. And that's one of those other challenges we talked about before, that you've got to draw an experience and take it as it comes and play it safe, I guess. Yeah, another neat thing about the aeroplane is we don't have an autopilot either. So all of that stuff is hand flown.
Everything's hand flown.
Everything's hand flown, especially even through that muck, I guess we'll call it, which is and look, people ask me what, no autopilot. I was like, I actually enjoy not having an autopilot because I love flying and it actually keeps me a little bit more switched on, just sitting there and keeping a scan going to keep us straight and level and whatnot. And we're two crew, so you're not always the pilot flying. If you want to have a break, you can swap over and whatnot. But it's well managed. There's days where you wish you did have an autopilot. But
well, those fair weather days where there's nothing happening, you probably wish you did.
You're trying to
But then in saying that, I mean, assumedly, you've got your trim, assuming there's rudder trim.
Oh, mate, yep. We've got three-axis trim.
Three-axis trim. So, the plane, I imagine, flies very stable.
Very, very stable aircraft. Everyone who flies it comments about how beautiful it is to fly as well. So that's another thing that certainly helps, yeah.
I love it. There was obviously some very, very switched-on engineers at Grumman that designed that aircraft for it to be still, in heavy operation so many years later. And it'd be amazing to have a chat with those engineers from back in the day and for them to see your Grumman Mallards now with all of the technology in them. Their minds would be blown, no doubt.
Absolutely.
I had a thought before that I wanted to ask, and that is maximum takeoff weight of the Mallard.
Yeah, so originally the Mallard was built back in the 40s. It was built as a single pilot aircraft, and the maximum takeoff weight was below 5,700 kilos. I think it was because I think they were all in pounds, and I think from memory, don't quote me on this one, but I think it was 12,000 pounds.
Right.
We don't work in pounds anymore, but I think that equates to like just under 5.7 tons.
Yeah.
Someone can fact check me on that one. But we have upgraded the aircraft because another thing to know about the airplane is, so a bit of a backstory here to answer a simple question in the long way around. In the late 60s and early 70s, the first turbine Mallards were created with an STC, a supplemental type certificate, known as the Frakes Mallard.
Okay.
And the company was called Frakes, and they did the PD6 conversion, same engine, Dash 34 PD6s, and created the first turbine Mallards. And they did, I think, about 9 or 12 or something like that, all up. Now, when Paspaley got the 3 in the 90s that they had over a certain period, they didn't get them all at once. One of them was a turboprop already, a Frakes Mallard, and the other two were still radial engines.
Right.
And they used to run the radials on the shorter hops, mainly the Port Bremer runs up to the Coburg Wear, and then they'd run the turbine Mallard all the way through to Broome. And actually, at some stages, they did go further past Broome, further to the west, because of its had better endurance, more reliable, being turboprop, faster, etc. Now, Paspaley had a few issues with some of their radial ones, and they wanted to go turbine, so they decided to, instead of getting them all done as Frakes versions, because we were using them so specifically in our operation, they decided to create their own STC, their own supplemental type certificate. So they went through the process of doing that, and we converted one. I think it was late 90s, early 2000s was the first one that came out. And even though it's a turbine Mallard, it's what we call an AT Mallard, a G-73 AT,
right,
which stands for Australian turbine. And so all three of them, including the actual other turbine aircraft, all went through the modification and were created as these AT Mallards. So they are three unique to the whole fleet of 59 that we ever built. Now, also after they were all converted, we also got a gross weight increase allowance that raised it up to, and here's your answer to your question, 6,350 kilos, 6,350 kilos max takeoff weight. So we now are above that 5,700. That's what makes us mandatory 2-crew aircraft.
Right.
And it gives us a good payload to work with, I guess.
And so this leads me to my next question. You were flying the Caravan in Halong Bay, and you were flying the EX Caravan, right?
Yep.
Was that, and the Caravan I flew was the 600 shaft horsepower variant. Was the EX the 750?
It was, I can't remember. It was 800, I think, from memory. I think it was bigger than that.
Right.
And I could be wrong. The EX, the EX has had the bigger donk in it. I think the 140, which I think was in the 800s, but I could be wrong.
No, you're right. 867 shaft horsepower.
There you go. 867. That's right. The three numbers that are right next to each other, but just swapped around. That's how I remember it.
And the Mallards 2x750.
It is that the engines, the 34s, are 750 horsepower, but we actually derate them to 680, all simply by drawing a red line on the torque gauge. It's a bit lower than what it should be.
Yep.
And the main reason for that is single engine performance with our rudder. So our rudder's not big enough for that amount of power right down near those speeds that would flip it on its back.
Yeah,
so,
gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. And so going back to my question, you were flying the EX in Halong Bay, and then you've got this phone call from one of your mates, I think it was Drew, you said his name was, saying that, hey, we've had a spot open up. And so you've gone from flying an aircraft with a maximum takeoff weight less than 5,700 kilos, which means you could do it on a commercial license, but now you're coming to an aircraft that's over 5,700 kilos, so that's an air transport pilot license. When did that happen? When did you get your air transport pilot license? Yeah,
so it's funny. So PAS, we kind of did, we have two kind of operations. The first one is really for our pearling work, right? So all of that can be, this is pre-2019, so this was in the old regs.
Right.
But it still kind of works today. But we can operate those flights as a private operations. Which actually meant that our captains could operate under a CPL only.
Okay.
In fact, but charter, or the old term charter, was required to have an ATPL. Now, a few of our senior captains at our company had grandfathered ATPLs from back in the day anyway. Well, they had ATPLs from back in the day.
Yeah.
So they were already that rated. And then now even today, now the rules have changed and we've gone to Part 91, 121, they're the two that we operate at. We're not 135, which is a lot of the GA charter or air transport.
Right.
We can operate still Part 91 if we wanted to, although we do try and keep all of our standards now to Part 121, so there's no confusion, because Part 121 is quite confusing,
right,
and very involved. The other thing as well is I came in as a first officer. Everyone basically comes in the company generally these days, unless they have Mallard time, which is pretty hard to achieve. They come in as a first officer, and you don't need an ATPL to be a first officer. It's only to be in command.
Yeah.
So I was a first officer there for a year and a half, and then we started to look into more and more commercial work, and there was going to be need for another captain with an ATPL, and I was just lucky that I had my subjects done, and I had the night hours, or near enough the night hours. PAS kind of helped us out by changing some departure times to very early so we could depart at night and get more night hours. But yeah, and then we went down and did the MCC, myself and another pilot, Chad, who's now the head of flying ops now. He and I went down to the sunny coast for 3 weeks, I think it was, or 2 weeks, and did the MCC and ATPL course on the Citation Mustang simulator, which was a really cool little experience to tick that off. But so that happened, and then kind of worked through my command training and to be captain. So I've been in command for about 4.5 years or something.
That's really cool. Okay, so you had a frozen ATPL, so you'd done your subjects and then just had to
unfreeze it. Yep.
Unfreeze it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed out on the automatic ATPLs that were handed out. When you got your 1,500 hours and your night and all that. So I had the frozen one, and which was it was interesting. It was basically an IPC, like an instrument proficiency check, to that kind of standard, really, in this Citation Mustang sim. And it was cool to kind of put your head down and bum up for 2 weeks on a different aircraft, and a little jet and all this. Not that I actually saw the real thing, but to be in a simulator environment was really cool, and to learn from some really experienced kind of jet pilots, I guess. So that was good little experience there. Yeah,
very nice, very nice. And I was going to ask a question just around if you could think of any or paint the picture of any real challenges that you had along the way.
I had a medical issue when I was 23. I was actually king hit in Ely Beach, and ended up with a depressed skull fracture.
Oh wow!
And I was flown to Townsville on the RFDS, so forgot my resume and didn't hand it to the pilots on the flight, unfortunately. But ended up having surgery to basically cut out my all around the depression. It was like if you imagine like a tennis ball shape indent on the skull.
My goodness.
Going in. They basically cut it all out around that and then flattened it and put a mesh plate over the top and screwed it back in. But I had no issues other than, to me, it was just a broken bone. And I got quite lucky. Obviously, there's a lot of media about king hits and whatnot and punches to the head. And so I kind of was quite lucky, I guess, in a way that it didn't turn out worse. But as you do, head injury, you better give the old CASA a call and inform them of your injury and whatnot. And as expected, medical was cancelled initially and whatnot. And I thought, no, it's fine. We'll play the recovery game and be back flying in no time. And what I thought would be probably a 3-month break from flying, and this was at the Airwit Sunday days, and I was lucky enough to go back and actually worked in the hangar for 3 months, did operations work and all these different jobs they kept me on, because they believed as well that I was going to be up and going very soon again as well. So long story short, basically CASA wanted to stop me from flying anywhere up to 24 months. And I believe if I had have gone down that route, they would have just kept saying no, basically.
Yeah, right.
They would have found more and more reasons just to stop me from flying medically. But I ended up just as the deeper and deeper I got into it, and I felt like I was being unfairly treated, ended up getting lawyers involved, aviation lawyers, and ended up taking CASA to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, which is part of the process of, if you do lose your medical for any reason, you can, and you don't agree with their judgment, I guess, you can follow this path to appeal their decision. And ended up hands down winning that, mainly because of the fact that they were picking doctors who would say no rather than taking the advice of the doctor they originally wanted.
Yeah, right.
Who did say that I had no other greater risk of seizures than the general public.
Yeah.
So look, that was a pretty trying time. I think luckily I was young. I had a very supporting partner who's now my wife, Jenna. She was super supportive the whole time. Yeah, that was a challenging one.
Thank you for being vulnerable. And that's something very difficult to talk about, because I'm going to make a really poor assumption here, but there would be a lot of emotion attached to that period in your life. So I really appreciate you opening up, especially for the listeners, and especially for our listeners who are young aspiring pilots. There's that whole medical aspect to it. And it's not to say don't, it's just to say be aware.
I think on top of that as well, I think like we all like to have fun, and it did occur on a night out when I was on the beers with friends and whatnot, and in party mode as most young 23-year-olds are and whatnot. But just if you are passionate about this is not a stacking shelves at Coles type job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not that I'm taking anything away from those great people who keep our shelves stacked up, but this is your career, this is your livelihood, this is your passion. So, you might just want to think, maybe I'm talking as a bit, the dad in me is coming out and talking more about being responsible and whatnot. But yeah, just think a little bit more about your decisions, I guess, when you're out in those social scenarios.
100%. There's so many aspects to, in my opinion, to medicals. And even to throw another example out there, let's take a mustering pilot, be it a fixed wing or a rotary wing mustering pilot that goes out west and is doing that job out there. They'll be doing other things, just like you would be doing other things, cleaning aircraft and whatnot when you'd come in from the day's work. They'll be doing other things out on the farm that don't involve flying, be it fencing or rounding up cattle in close proximity, and you can get injured.
Yeah.
Not at a bar.
Yep.
But just by something else that's going to happen that's going to stop you flying.
Oh, sport. Sport's another big one.
Sport's a massive one.
I see a lot of young pilots who are going out there playing AFL, and I love AFL. I used to play it as a kid, but the injuries you can get there that are going to put your career backwards is insane.
Yeah. So it's just being mindful of that,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So once again, an incredible journey, and yours has come down a track. Like I said to Alex Penrose, where to from here? You're going to be an astronaut? And you just think flying Mallards in the top end, where to from here? Like, how do you top that? Yeah,
it's a good question. It's funny because when we came here, I came obviously across with my wife, and we're here, and I think we're already in a mindset that I don't think we'd got ourselves yet into a mindset of this is settling down, like we need to settle down, or
right,
the whole family and buy the house, we were always like, we'll give this probably 5 years, and it's obviously a great job for me that can progress me wherever I want to go, really. We always kind of really wanted to go back to the sunny coast area, which is where kind of she was from. So, and always, so with that, I guess what came was always in the back of the mind was what's next. And, we'd have these conversations every now and again, what's next? And that caused so much stress for me in a way. Like I'm sitting back having the time of my life flying this amazing aeroplane and having a great, we were probably just starting to have kids. going down that path, and just really enjoying ourselves. But then every time that kind of came up, it would cause stress because I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I didn't know what was the next thing.
Yeah.
And then we ended up, so we now own a house here in Darwin, and we've got 3 kids. And at some point we made a decision that, you know what, life's actually pretty good here at the moment. Like we both have great jobs. Jenna's actually the business manager of the Mallards.
Okay. Anywhere
from engineering and maintenance planning to scheduling pilots, rosters to working charter work. She does everything. So does an amazing job there, and she's very skilled at what she does. But she also really enjoys the multifaceted, type of job she has.
Yeah.
So, and just the simple things like work's 5 minutes away, kids' school's very close.
Yeah.
Like, we go back to the sunny coast or back to Brisbane, and like we're in a car for 45 minutes, and it doesn't look any different. And yeah, sure, you've got beaches you can kind of swim in, and a few of the other big things that you have on the East Coast or whatnot. But you know what? I think we've just accepted that life's pretty good here. And so to answer that question, I don't really know what is next and what, everyone thinks about airlines. I don't really think that's the kind of flying that I would enjoy. I think I would enjoy it for a year or so as the learning phase of a new aircraft and a new type of flying, and going. What they do is incredible, and but I think that's something that I think about. What are the worst parts of my job that I don't like, and that is the cruise element. And look, they're not all cruisy. You can Melbourne to Sydney or whatever. That's a pretty short sector and pretty busy, I imagine. But so I don't know if that's it. And
well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think I'm in a pretty comfortable space that I'm happy doing what I'm doing. Sure, I'm only 34, so I know there's a lot of aviation in front of me, but and it's unlikely that I'll retire on the Mallard. But yeah, for now it's just continue doing what I love and have a passion for. And I mentioned earlier my book. I wrote a kid's book called Marty the Mallard and the Lost Tinny, which is a book about flying boats who goes out and tries to find this lost tinny. It's obviously aimed at young kids, similar to my kids' age. So I'm into that creative stuff. Obviously I have the podcast. I love doing content for my Instagram, that Mallard guy, and putting out good photos and videos of what we do.
You do very well at that.
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for that kind of creative stuff as well. So the kids' book was a big surprise of how popular it was and how well it came out, which I was really happy with. So I think what's next is probably more things like that. I've written articles in magazines and but from a professional perspective, I guess I've also stepped into a role now as head of training and checking. So next year I'll be doing the type rating training endorsement for my instructor rating for the Mallard. So I'll be able to issue. Well, not issue because that's an examiner check, but I'll be able to conduct the flight training for a type rating on the Mallard.
Right.
And then with the eventual plan to do the examiner stuff as well. So, there's that professional development, which is really exciting as well. But yeah, I love flying boats. I love seaplanes, and I'm reading books about Pan Am seaplanes at the moment and flying boats back in the 40s and whatnot. So as seaplane training. I'm doing seaplane training on the Buccaneer up here as well, doing floating hull endorsements. So, yeah, just enjoying everything about seaplanes, really.
That's awesome. I'm going to think back to Alex, because I spoke to Alex obviously fairly recently, and that was the same kind of thing. It's like, well, to put it in my words, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, And it's, I think, another good thing for young pilots or aspiring pilots to understand is that it's completely okay to not aspire to fly in the airlines.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing wrong with flying in the airlines. I have many friends that do that and they love it, and more power to them. But it's not for everyone. It certainly wasn't going to be for me. That was not where I had my sights set. My sights were set at the RFDS, and that's okay. I think it's fantastic that was your answer. You mentioned your book, Marty the Mallard. I have to ask a question because of the story of Marty going and finding the tinny. Is that something you've had to do?
No, not not. I guess not directly, but it's just a simple kids yarn, I guess, and it incorporates. The book has photos of actual photos in the background, and then as I mentioned before, my dad does some of the he did all the illustrations and of Marty and whatnot. So incorporating the real life pictures with Marty the character, which works really well actually. They're not every page is like that. About half of them are like that, and some are simple backgrounds or slightly drawn backgrounds. But it's a fun little book and on an adventure. And it involves, and what I love about the book is that I've tried to incorporate a lot about what we do, So, there's a refueling at Kuri Bay on the drum. So it's an actual photo of the beautiful Kuri Bay background with a fuel raft that's the actual fuel raft. Right. And Marty's just nosed up onto the fuel raft it's Marty there, it's not the real Mallard. And in the actual reflection off the water, it's not glassy, but you can see that you can see that there was a Mallard there, but it actually ties in with the aircraft.
That's awesome. That's clever.
So that worked really well. And he's up on the wing with a hose, refueling the Mallard and the pilot, who's Pilot Pete, and then there's another shot. One of the other pages is the Mallard on the water talking to a yacht, and Pilot Pete's hanging out the nose of the little nose hatch that we have there. So that's another one of the cool things that we do is sitting up in the nose bay there with the engines running.
You've got some awesome footage of that too, photos and video. That's really special.
That's something definitely very unique with our role. Yeah, even like at the end of the day, once they've saved the tinny and found the tinny and brought him back, and the wash down. Pilot Pete staying there washing the salt off Marty. I just think that it does incorporate the role of the Mallard, or what we do with the Mallard, quite fun. And one of the things I've said before is reading a lot of kids' books now with young kids. Some of them are quite painful, and you want to try and hide those ones in the back of the closet somewhere so that you never see them ever again. And they're generally the kids' favourite ones. And so I wanted to create a book that was interesting for the kids, but also interesting for the adults reading it. And let's face it, a lot of the people who are going to buy this book are generally aviation nerds like us. And they're probably just going to buy it simply because they follow me potentially and want to get something Mallard related, but in the end they're going to be sitting down there reading and kind of thinking about what it'd be like to fly the Mallard, and while the kids are also getting something out of it. So it's pretty cool.
I have 3 questions about the book. One is, without spoilers, have you got ideas for the sequel?
Yes, the second book is already written, and I'm just waiting for Dad's on holidays at the moment. And look, it's probably also the terrible timing to release another one very quickly with the Christmas period being over and stuff. Probably don't want to rush it out anyway. But the second book is definitely written and have a good plot, I think. I have a good feeling about this book. I think it's it's got some good values and good qualities about it, I think. So and
I guess the litmus test is your kids, although they might be biased.
They can also be your harshest critics, can't they?
True that.
It was funny because I kind of started to introduce some pictures of Marty to them, and then we ended up, when we made the book, we printed it out just on A4, and Dad basically stapled it. The way he printed it was so that he could make it like a book, just on A4. So we could just get a feel of how the book felt, when reading it. And so I took it home to the kids, and they had a read of it. And by the time the actual book came out, I think they were pretty over Marty the Mallard, which probably same as my wife.
Oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was a helicopter that made an appearance? But anyway.
Yeah, she'll have to play her cards right.
There you go.
Her name's Jenna, and I normally alliterate all the characters, so maybe she can be Jenna the Gyro instead of the helicopter.
Ah, there you go. Or Jenna the Jet Ranger.
Oh, damn it. Okay, now I have to do
that. Second question, I saw a photo of you with our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Did you get to read the book to Prime Minister Albanese?
No, it was obviously a slow news week that week, wasn't it? Or a slow week.
What was the story there?
Oh, there was another random one, mate. Like, I was on holiday in Tassie, and Jenna, as I mentioned, she's in the business manager of our company, and she got a message from someone in the kind of corporate Paspaley area.
Yeah.
Who said, Luke Gosling, who's the federal Labor member for Solomon, which is basically the NT.
Right.
And who's up in Darwin, he saw the book in an NT News article, because I got Marty to feature in the NT News, which is our top-end newspaper. A lot of people know about the NT News for all their silly headlines.
Right.
So he saw the ad, and also he was going to Parliament to launch a book for someone that he knew. And anyway, he passed on his number to this guy who passed it to Jenna. I gave him a phone call, and he said, yeah, look, if you're interested, I want to take it to Canberra and do a soft launch or a bit of a book launch for you. And I was like, oh, sweet. And he goes, I don't really have a budget for it. So, and there was no talk of the PM at this stage. So he kind of said, if you think it's worthwhile, come on down. If not, it'll still get read out at Parliament. And anyway, didn't really know what to think about too much. And then it kind of, the details became a bit more planned as we got closer to the date. And I looked at the flights, and I was like, I've never been to Canberra before. I was in Brisbane at the time when we kind of looked at it, and I was like, Virgin points. I got a few points up my sleeve. I can probably make this happen just on points anyway. So I was like, let's just do it. So I went down there, got in at like midnight in Canberra, woke up the next morning at 6 o'clock and got on an e-scooter and just zoomed around the town to get a feel of it, and met Luke Gosling at Parliament House and went into his office, and then he kind of like just took me on a little bit of a tour around Parliament House, and then we ended up at the PM's office and kind of sitting outside, and he's met with this guy, Mark, who's, I think he must be his like PA for the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And Mark's coming, he's like, oh yeah, go Luke, how we going, mate? Yeah, I had you down for 9:15 in your office. You want to just do it here instead? Blah, blah, blah. And the whole time I'm just like, do what? What's going on? Like, anyway, and then there was a security guard who's, because the PM's office has a bit more security, and the security guards recognised Luke Gosling from an NT, and he was in the army like Luke was, and so they start talking, and I can't really get a word in to kind of even just be like, how do I address the PM? Like, are we going to meet him right now? Like, what's going on? Like, and I'm like, do I say, g'day, Mr. Prime Minister? Do I go, g'day, Elbow? Like everyone, everyone calls him Elbow, like. Anyway, then it's time to come on in, and there's a photographer that's with him. It's taking photos as I walk in and everything. And into his office, said, how you going, Mr. Prime Minister? Thought I'd keep it a bit professional.
Yeah.
And presented him with a copy of the book. And it's funny, your question was, did you get to read it to him? And someone else asked me that as well. They said, did you make him sit on the ground and sit down as you sat on a chair and make sure his legs are crossed and read the book to him? But no, I didn't, unfortunately. I had about 3 minutes with him, I think, and talked a little bit about Luke was there as well, and talked a little bit about the job I do, the Mallards, and writing the book and stuff.
What an amazing opportunity, though.
Yeah, and it was just, and look, thinking back about it, like going to Dad in I think it was in August, just going, Dad, I really want to write this kid's book. Like this has been on my mind for like over a year. Can we just I just want retired now. You're the one who's going to be drawing it, because I can draw a little bit, but I can't do anything that qualifies to what he can do. I was like, come on, let's get motivated. And I was in Broome actually working at the Horry Falls for 2 weeks, and I was like, after every shift, I went over to his house and I was like, right, let's go. What do we got next? Let's do it. Let's get more done.
Yeah.
I was really cracking the whip a fair bit on him. And to think that from August to November, the book was in planning stage to me being at the Prime Minister's office presenting him a book was very surreal and very odd.
Wow. Did Prime Minister Albanese ask you to sign it?
No, and I didn't actually sign that copy, unfortunately.
Well, that's a lost opportunity for him.
Yeah, I know. And that was probably one of my regrets. I had a pen on me too. I was ready to sign it for him.
Wow, that's crazy. That's just awesome. My third question is, where can we buy one?
Good question. So they're available on Amazon. So if you just go on amazon.com.au, I'm guessing most of your listeners are probably Australian.
The bulk are, yep.
Yeah, so just jump on Amazon. It's available on all the worldwide Amazon, and just search Marty the Mallard, and it should come up reasonably close to the top after you go through all the sponsored books first.
Yep.
And you can purchase it there. If you're in Darwin, there's some local news agencies and books places that do have copies as well.
If you're in Darwin, you might be able to get a signed copy.
Well, that's right. Yeah, just get in touch. And I did a first release through Instagram, and most of those copies were, if people wanted them signed, I'd sign for them. So you had a solid one night, signing about 100 books or something, and posting them off all around the world, which is pretty cool as well.
That's awesome.
Taking Marty around the world, yeah.
That's incredible. So you're flying these incredible machines in the top end of Australia. You're now authoring children's books about the Mallard, Marty the Mallard, which has led you to meet the person that runs our country, which is just like my brain's exploded just before. I don't know if you could tell. And I'm kind of lost for words now. I've mentioned a couple of times what I've seen on your Instagram account, which to me is just majestic and beautiful, you know, where you fly and these machines that you fly. But I am an aviation geek, so that's probably why I'm using those words. As far as the Instagram goes and the social media goes, what's your drive behind doing that? Because take it from me, listeners, audio content is one thing to edit, and I edit video content for part of my job, and it's incredibly time consuming. So apart from being a dad and having a partner and being a full-time commercial pilot, why are you doing this?
Well, it's a passion, really. I have a strong passion for flying off the water, and most of it is mainly because I want to share our unique job that we have, flying the Mallard, but also inspire people to get into seaplane flying and to get them to experience some of the amazing things that we get to do, you know, that being flying off the water. So that's, as I mentioned before as well, I do have that creative side in me, I think, and I do enjoy creating the videos that I share. And look, let's be honest, the social media platforms are designed to want you to, or draw you into wanting to continue creating content. Yeah. So there's probably that aspect as well, a little bit, you know, but look, it's got to do with mainly because I want to share the incredible stuff that we do. And look, before that Mallard guy came about, not many people knew about this amazing job and amazing aircraft that were operating in Australia up the top end. Like, you know, they're now the largest passenger carrying flying boats still operating commercially in the world. Isn't that crazy? Like, and they're 77 years old, and you know, modernized with turbine engines and upgraded avionics and IFR 2 crew, and we're doing it here in Australia.
Yeah. And like I said earlier on, and you've been a part of unpacking this for me, I hadn't, even when I was flying, didn't give float planes a second thought. It wasn't on my radar. But now, you know, I interviewed a chap by the name of Sean Kelly, who flies a Wilga here at the sunny coast off the Maroochy River.
Yep.
So, yeah, interviewed him, and then in talking with Alex Penrose and hearing his history of part of his career flying the float planes out of the Whitsundays and also up in the Philippines, just really started to open my eyes. And like I said, I'd listened to your podcast earlier on in the year, but being reintroduced to it, it's kind of got me hooked.
It does.
I'm actually fairly lost for words. You know, I'm not articulating what I'm thinking very well.
And I think that's another reason why the podcast, I love the podcast so much, and was so just passionate about that as well. Unfortunately, just something had to give, I guess. And like you said, the editing of podcasts and the workload was a lot. And I'd like to still keep it. I mean, it's still live. I still pay for it to be up there. Yeah. But that was about sharing people's seaplane stories to the world, you know, and sharing from all around the world, different aspects. And, you know, you mentioned there before that people don't have to go to the airlines. You know, you don't have to fly the Mallard, but you have different seaplane jobs. You know, you could be doing water bombing in a seaplane, tourist work. You could do charter work, almost like an airline in the Maldives. Like, there's still lots of variety of seaplane operations that you can do, and especially with the the locations you can go, Alaska, like I said, the Maldives, Australia, Canada, like there's just so many cool options, and to see the world and to see some beautiful scenery, which is what we get to do.
And you've only got to listen to On the Step to get that picture painted pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think that is very commendable. And I love that you've mentioned that you're sharing this information. You're sharing the videos, the shorts on Instagram or the photos, Marty the Mallard book, in order to spotlight seaplane flying. And that I think is awesome. And if you're into aviation, if you're listening to the podcast, obviously this podcast, you must be into aviation. Otherwise you wouldn't listen to me ramble. Go and listen to On the Step. Start at episode 28 and hear the full story of Dan, that Mallard guy, and then go back to episode 1 and listen to these stories, because they are incredible. And if you're, airline pilot, flying doctor pilot, the mustering, just go and have a listen, because it's a side of aviation that you may never have considered before, like I hadn't, that you hadn't heard these stories. I mean, Dan shared with us a story earlier on in the podcast about landing the Cardinal in a field because of the situation that you and your friend had found yourselves in. Well, you don't have to get too far into On the Step to be hearing these stories, but they're to do with taking off and landing and flying over water. So it's to me fascinating, and it's an aspect that you're not going to hear elsewhere, certainly not in that concentrated sense, because your podcast, Dan, On the Step, is purely floatplane and seaplane related, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so if you didn't have it, well, there was a few people there that I might have got them on and they barely touched the seaplane aspect, but maybe they had other really interesting things in their life that was still pretty cool to highlight, but I kind of used their little bit of a seaplane experience just to get them on the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, majority of them are either seaplane pilots, did float builders, done one with engineers about maintenance, seaplanes.
Mm-hmm.
Firebombing ones. It's really cool actually when I do create another episode and I upload it onto the platform that hosts them. You go back and then you see there's something like 71 other episodes.
Yeah.
You're just like, there's such a variety of interesting stories. And yeah, I was pretty proud that I actually was able to do all that. Yeah, a couple of Martin Mars pilots. Like I said, CL415, Fireboss firebombers. Like I said, episode number 1 was with an old chief pilot who we talked all about the Mallard. Was the first episode, about all the differences about the Mallard and unique things, which was a really fun episode to start off with.
And from my aspect, just for some feedback, it was intriguing to listen to that. And you've talked about bits and pieces of that tonight, but you and he went into a lot of detail, and I found it very, very intriguing. And I listened to it directly after listening to episode 28 and hearing your whole backstory. So yeah, highly recommend go 28, the number 1, and then you've got some other specials you've done in there about wheels down, water landings.
Well, yeah, I was actually just thinking about that exactly thing, and safety is another big thing that I try and want to get across, and you do learn safe practices by listening to these other people's misfortunes or their scare stories. Did a couple of episodes called Seaplane Scares, where at the end of end of some episodes, I'd ask someone if they could do a seaplane scare where they just talked about a story, and then I kind of collated those into an episode of maybe like 6 or 7 different stories from different past guests. That was kind of cool. And I did a couple on wheels down water landings. I actually got 2 people who were involved in wheels down water landings to talk about their story and hear about what it's actually like to go through the event. Why did it happen? And then amphib flying, first of all, like there's 3 types of pilots. You got someone who's got fixed undercarriage and they never consider their gear at all. So that doesn't matter if they never run a checklist or never think about their gear the whole time. Their gear's fixed. It's always going to be down. They'll be fine. The retractable undercarriage pilot, they have this mindset that gear up is unsafe and gear down is safe. Mm-hmm. And generally it's green is down and safe and red is up and unsafe. Mm-hmm. And then the amphib pilot is different. Like we actually have to, doesn't sound very hard, but you have to actually place the gear relative to what the landing surface is. So up for obviously for water, down for land. But both of those positions can be unsafe.
Right.
So, and what I try and teach people when I do the floating hull endorsements is you could sit there and you could tell me when we do our, bum fish check, as most single engine piston pilots probably use, brakes, undercarriage, so undercarriage, okay. The gear's down, it's selected down, it's indicating down, and it's visually down out the side. Okay. Yep, perfect. And then you come onto final and you do your puffer check, your pitches full fine undercarriage. Yep, it's down, full flap, and we've, water rudders, we include that on their puffer check. Water rudders are up, okay. Yep, everything that's fine, but you're landing on the water. So everything, the aircraft doesn't know, but you've set the aircraft up perfectly for a landing, but the landing surface is wrong. And all of a sudden you've flipped up the aeroplane and you're upside down. So that's the biggest threat with amphibious seaplane flying is you can have that aeroplane set up perfectly for landing, but can all go dramatically wrong without realizing, So I tell people what my thing is I point out the window and I say, okay, undercarriage, we're landing on the water. And I actually point at the water because it's very hard to actually point at water and say the wrong thing.
Sure, yes. And
I say, okay, we need the undercarriage to be up, selected up, indicated up, visually up,
Yeah.
And you got to go through the whole process the whole time. Selector, indicated, and what's the indicator doing? Where's the visual? It's not just simply gear up, gear down.
Yeah.
So gear safety is a big one. We're struggling in the seaplane industry as a whole on insurance because we are having a lot of accidents, a lot of simple accidents that occur. Obviously, we're in a more dynamic environment being on the water. So we are at risk of, even doesn't have to be amphib gear accidents. It could just be, a boat wake that comes through that someone didn't see that causes an aircraft to dig a float in or, and all of a sudden they've done a water loop and, that's an insurance payout or something, So in fact, a lot of operators in Australia, if not the whole world, are flying their amphib aircraft with only third-party insurance, basically, or public liability,
right?
Not with hull insurance, because insurance companies are either pricing them so high that they can't afford to take the insurance on, or they're just not quoting them for hull insurance at all, and they're only subjecting them to land only operations for insurance,
right?
Especially for low hour pilots. So we need accidents to slow down. We need people to focus on safety and fly safe to ensure that we avoid a lot of these accidents.
Yeah.
And a lot of that means more flying, to be honest. More, water flying is one of those ones that you need to do a lot more of it. You need to be current with water flying. Otherwise you can make yourself a little bit dangerous in a way. So get out there and practice your water flying, but do it safely, run your checklists, and we need to work as a whole industry to be able to continue down that no accident pathway to ensure that we can make insurance, especially for commercial operators, to insure a seaplane makes it really difficult for commercial operators to operate. So
a couple of rapid fire questions, Dan. I hope you don't mind answering these for our listeners. First question, can you tell us about a memorable, you've already shared some, but can you maybe think of another memorable experience you've had flying a particular aircraft and what made it special to you?
This is more of a celebrity, I guess, but it kind of popped into my head. I flew Slash from the Guns N' Roses.
Oh, wow.
From Hamilton Island to Hayman Island in an amphib caravan, and coming to land at Hayman on the water there. Touchdown, and Slash's wife, she screamed and squealed in excitement, I think. So that was pretty cool to say you made Slash's wife scream.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Takeoff on the water in Whitsundays, where a whale was basically right on the takeoff path.
Oh, no.
Fair way in front, though, and once I got airborne, I kind of told the passengers, hey, have a look at the left window, everyone. And there are a couple of memorable ones coming to mind. The safari, actually in the Mallard, the first safari flight we did a couple of, I think we did about 4 different variety, or 3 different varieties. We did one. The first one was in 2019, was from Darwin all the way through to Rathmines in Newcastle, or Lake Macquarie, Newcastle, over 3 days, stopping at Longreach the first night, Hamilton Island the second, Fraser Island the third, and then, finishing up in Rathmines. And the history of flying boat activity in Rathmines, especially Catalina stuff, the Catalina ramp. Well, it was for the Catalina Flying Festival, Rathmines Catalina Festival, I think it's called.
Right.
Yeah, we flew down there, landed on the one, and to take the Mallard all that way, and then we did scenic flights all the next 2 days for people, 20-minute scenic flights on the Mallard. It was really fun. That was a really good highlight, and being back at Whitehaven with the Mallard was just really special. From coming from flying in the Whitsundays on beavers and caravans, and then to have the Mallard sitting at Whitehaven Beach was really cool. We did it twice actually, that trip, and then we came to join with the Seaplane Pilot Association yearly conference in the Whitsundays as well, and we had 3 days of packed flying planned, doing tours out to Whitehaven Beach with Air Whitsunday.
Yeah.
And both of those trips spent one time at the beach, and the weather was terrible.
Oh, no.
And cancelled all of our tours for that weekend. So, which was a bit of a shame. Didn't get the blue sky Mallard sitting on the blue sky and turquoise waters. It was quite windy and rainy and stuff, but that was pretty special. So there are a couple of highlights.
That's 2 pretty awesome highlights. Next question. What's one of your most fear-filled flight experiences?
I've been quite lucky so far not to have anything really too dramatic. I think seaplane flying, it can get a bit more interesting and inside a bit more fear than normal land plane flying in a way, I think, because of, like I said before, quite a dynamic. You've got the wind and the waves and the weather to change it up. One thing probably is flying in the top end in IMC in the wet season, getting bounced around. That can raise the blood pressure, I guess, and raise the heart rate.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it'd get anyone's heart rate up.
Yeah.
If you were given an expense-free opportunity to be endorsed on any airframe, which would it be and why?
Oh, I'd love to fly one of the old, like 4-engine flying boats, Sandringham, Sunderland.
I had you pegged for a Sunderland.
Yeah. So one of those, that Lord Howe Island flights, and, PG Taylor's one of my idols, I think.
Right.
And if you don't know him, or if you haven't heard of him, he was probably most famous for climbing out onto the wing of the Southern Cross, the 3-engine aircraft that actually the Haas Museum have just got. I don't know, I'm pretty sure it's a replica. I don't think it's a real one, but I could be wrong. They've got one just airborne after 20 years or something.
Ah.
And they basically had they had a prop brake, wooden prop. This is Kingsford Smiths flying this across to New Zealand.
Yeah.
And the prop snaps, and so they turn back and they're just holding enough height, and PG Taylor's a navigator on this flight, and but then the left engine's now losing oil pressure, and so it's leaking oil. So they've got 3 engines, but the plane can't maintain altitude on one. So they turned back. They got about a 4-hour flight ahead of them back to the East Coast, back to Brisbane, I think it was, and PG Taylor's now climbing out onto the strut of the broken engine, the one with the broken propeller, to drain oil into a hip flask, basically, size can or some sort of can, in the airflow, and then going out and tipping it into the live engine on the left that is running low of oil. And he did that over 4 hours to top up this engine. And every time he'd go back to the left-hand side, Kingsford Smith would have to pull the power back on that engine and just do this glide basically down to the water because there was too much airflow from the prop wash. Mm-hmm. And so to allow him to put the oil back in, and as soon as he get down to the water level, he'd have to fire it up again and go around basically. Sometimes with Taylor on the wing strut, just holding on for dear life.
Oh my goodness!
But then he became a very prominent flying boat pilot.
Right.
And so he flew the Catalina on the first ever crossing from Australia to South America, to Chile. And there was a famous landing there in Easter Island, which I could talk about for hours. But Easter Island is basically an island in the middle of the ocean, middle of huge ocean, and it's almost a circle shape. So there's just nowhere to hide from swell, and they're landing Catalina. They actually strapped JATO rockets to the side of this thing because they knew that this would be an incredibly hard takeoff. But
right.
That aeroplane is actually in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, and I got to see that on my holiday recently, and that was a cool moment. I was really excited about that actually.
That's
going
really
to see
cool.
Aeroplane in a museum.
Very cool.
So I don't even know what your question was, mate, but there's my long answer to a question. I've forgotten what it was.
Endorsement.
Oh, endorsement, yeah. So Catalina that's why I was going with PG Taylor. He ended up flying these I think it was Sandringhams. I think Sunderland was the military version, or it's one way or the other. But I think it was Sandringhams all the way through the Pacific Islands on safari-type flights. That would have been sick. Double-story, 4-engine radial flying boat in luxury, safari-type, like a cruise liner, basically, a cruise ship that flies in through the Pacific Islands. That's got to be the coolest thing that's ever happened.
Amazing. Didn't surprise me it was a seaplane, to be honest. But you unpacked that very well. This next one I usually ask, but I'm going to tailor it slightly. So what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out but wanting to get into floatplane or seaplane flying, and what resources or support systems would you recommend they seek?
Yep. And I do this a lot on the podcast because I have a similar question. I ask all my guests, how do people get into seaplane flying? And majority of the people say, and I 100% agree, and this is my tip basically, is you need to present yourself, like you need to come face to face to the operators of these seaplanes. And
with a PowerPoint presentation.
Well, yeah, you've been doing some research.
Episode 28.
There you go. I will leave that story for those people who want to go and search in episode 28.
That's right.
But you need to go there. Put a face to a resume. Try and help wash a plane at the end of the day. Just be in their face, because there's too many people out there who want to fly seaplanes, and not enough people who go out there and actually put a face to a name. And I flew up to the Whitsundays 4 times, I think, including my interview, over a year and a half from Geelong. And like I said, I'd only really been on an airliner really for the first time in my license.
Yeah.
But I was just like, no, I want to fly for Air Whitsunday. I'm going up there. And went and visited them, got on a free flight on one of their tours, which was a bonus. Mm-hmm. But you just got to get up there, meet the people. And the other thing is really go and get your endorsement. I mean, there's two types of people. One of them is the person who says they want to fly a seaplane and they don't have a seaplane endorsement. The other one is the guy who wants to fly a seaplane and has gone out there and has already got their floatplane endorsement.
Yeah, right.
And is ready to go. Yeah. Because they're that keen, they've already got the endorsement. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
go out there and get it, and then come to the operators and say, I'm ready to go. I hate these people who come and say, like, if you give me a floatplane endorsement, I'll be your next pilot because I want to fly floats. It's not how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
anyway.
Great advice. No, great advice. As we wrap this episode up, sincere thank you to that Mallard guy, to you, Dan Bolton, for sharing your remarkable chapters of your aviation journey from the tranquil waters of Geelong, flying along the south coast of Victoria, through to the vibrant landscapes of the Great Barrier Reef, Vietnam and beyond, up in the top end there. As I'm sure the listeners will attest, your experiences truly encapsulate the spirit of exploration and the dedication to the skies and to narrow that down to seaplane flying in particular. Dan, we've talked about your Instagram. How can people find you? Like, how can listeners find you on the net?
Through Instagram, as you mentioned there, that Mallard guy. Also on Facebook, that Mallard guy. Yeah, podcast, as you mentioned, On the Step. Apple Podcast, Spotify, all the normal podcast players there. Yeah, would love to hear any feedback. If anyone has got to this far in the episode, I know it's a long one. Congratulations to you and thank you for hanging out, because it's been a long but very fun and interesting chat with you, Damien. So thank you very much.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. It has been a long chat, and hopefully you've been entertained along the way. So yes, that Mallard guy, Mallard, that Mallard guy on Instagram. You can get the children's book, Marty the Mallard, from Amazon.com.au. Search for Marty the Mallard. If you jump on Instagram, you'll see the picture of Dan with Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister. So go have a look at that. Where can we get the calendar from? I've seen shots of the 2024 Mallard calendar. Where do we get that from?
Yeah, you need to just contact me for that one. I'll probably put it as a link in my bio as well on Instagram. It's just a Google Forms one. You fill out the form and I'll get a notification of it and ship it to you. Okay, well, I'll put the form link in the show notes as well. Sounds good, yep. That's an easy place to put it. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Dan. I know you've had a pretty busy day and we thankfully were able to catch up tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time out and sharing your story with me. And I can't recommend enough, and I probably sound like a bit of a fanboy, but go and listen to episode 28 of On the Step. You won't be disappointed. If you're listening to this now, you won't be disappointed with that. It's been an absolute having you on the show, Dan, so thanks so much. Thanks, Damien. Cheers, mate. Join us next time for more fascinating discussions. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform, and if you'd like to help out, feel free to leave a review. That'll help spread the word. Alternatively, you can listen to the podcast on the HiflyMedia YouTube channel. Music for the podcast is titled Dance With Me by Asher Lee, available at upbeat.io. The HiflyMedia podcast, uncovering the people and passion behind aviation, one story at a time.